The 30 Years' War was devastating, probably even more devastating than you realize. Entire areas of northern Germany were depopulated, as Europe's population fell by up to 20%, and some regions losing up to 60% of their population. It truly was a catastrophic war. So, who won it? It's unclear. The French expanded, the Dutch got their independence, the Protestant lords got increased rights, and the Habsburgs defended their domination over the Holy Roman Empire, even if their power within it got reduced. As the cherry on top, the Habsburgs kept control over the Protestant parts of their domain. All in all, nobody outright won. But this leaves the question, what if someone did? This video will tackle that question and answer, what if the Protestants won the 30 Years' War?
And when you're done watching Possible History's wonderful video, make sure to check out my video, where I explore the opposite outcome, a Catholic victory in the 30 Years' War, and how history and the world as we know it would change.
How do we allow the Protestant side to win more decisively? More consistent and organized support from the outside powers of France and Sweden. In our timeline, Sweden achieved major victories in the war between 1630 and 1634. Then, France got involved from 1635 to 1648, only after the Swedish king had died and the Swedish war effort had become much less successful. If France had entered the war when the rampage of the Swedes was at its peak, we would have an unholy amount of pressure mounting against the Catholics. Adding to this, we will have the Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, not die during the Battle of Lutzen, allowing Sweden to continue to perform exceptionally well against the Habsburgs. With these changes, we will allow the French and Swedish to win decisive victories against their opponents, eventually leading to the capture of Vienna and the capitulation of the Habsburg war effort. With this, the Habsburgs now lay defeated, and the victorious powers convene to reshape the map of Europe. Still, the question of what's next is a very difficult one, as there wasn't one unified Protestant bloc with a unified goal. The Dutch were fighting for their own independence from both the Spanish and the Holy Roman Empire at large. The Protestant lords were fighting for their God-given right to seize church lands. The Swedes were fighting to protect the Protestants and to seize control over the Baltic along the way. And France wasn't even Protestant, they just wanted to participate in the weakening of the Habsburg bloc. So we will go case by case. The Dutch achieved their independence, and with a more total Franco-Dutch victory over the Spanish, they could potentially seize more land than in our timeline. The Swedes still achieved control over Pomerania, Bremen and Verden, and perhaps slightly more. The French would absolutely be the biggest victors, as in the case of a total victory, they could cannibalize much of the disconnected Spanish territories up north. This would result in a much larger France after the war. Still, the biggest question is, what about the future of the HRE? What were the Protestants hoping to achieve within the empire? Destroy the power of the Catholic states, making Protestantism the dominant religion? Unlikely. Not only is this unenforceable, it would be massively destabilizing for the empire as a whole. The empire still held a lot of prestige, and so it would be reformed rather than destroyed. It's also very likely that the Austrians remain in power, at least for now. Sorry for the quick intermission, but most of you aren't subscribed. To get notified and keep up to date with the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so. Thank you. Still, the Protestants may just see their power within the empire increase very fast. Before the war, there were 7 electors. 3 of them were Catholic bishoprics, 3 of them were Protestants, Saxony, Brandenburg and the Palatinate, and then the final vote was Bohemia, under Habsburg control, so Catholic. But during the early stages of the 30 Years' War, the Habsburgs had revoked the Palatinate's electorate to give instead to the Catholics in Bavaria. With a full Protestant victory, this may be reversed, keeping the Palatinate vote in Protestant hands. More importantly, with the Habsburg defeat, Bohemia would likely achieve independence, with the throne of the new kingdom going to some Protestant lord, although who exactly this would be is impossible to say. If both of these things happen, 4 out of the 7 electors are now Protestant, something we will come back to later. Obviously, it should also not be understated that the loss of Bohemia, one of the wealthiest regions of the Habsburg realm, is an extremely big blow to Habsburg ambitions. The empire on a whole, now pretty evenly split between Protestant and Catholic lords, would see religious equality entrenched, and likely even more extensive rights for religious minorities, especially the Protestants, within Catholic lands. This is most important for the regions of Upper and Lower Austria, which had significant Protestant populations, which were repressed in our own timeline after the 30 Years' War. As for the entire empire, while the Habsburgs have not yet lost their crown, the HRE as an institution is even more dysfunctional than they were in our timeline, as Austria's power, within and outside of the empire, is increasingly irrelevant. So what happens next for this alternate timeline? Well, we really have two main victors, France and the Ottomans. By the 17th century, the Ottomans, while no longer the insane mega threat they were before, were still a very, very powerful nation, not even having reached their peak in size yet, reaching all the way up to the Carpathian Mountains in Europe. It would take another half century before the Turks would, for the first time ever, lose significant territories to a European-wide coalition, which would see the Habsburgs seizing most of Hungary from the Turks. Still, with the way that the Ottoman military worked, I will not predict the Turks conquer Vienna or further than that. Ottoman military campaigns began at their capital, Constantinople, around April, and in whichever direction they went, the campaign would end when weather conditions got worse. In terms of Vienna, this gave the Ottomans a very small window of April to September to take the city, which would be very difficult to accomplish. But still, the Habsburgs were the most important state participating in the downfall of the Turks, especially early on. With the loss of control over the Bohemian crown lands, this would mean that the Habsburgs likely never conquer Hungary. While the Turks may still enter a slow decline as Europe starts to eclipse them in terms of state building, it would take far, far longer before that societal and technological decline actually translates into losing territory. Besides, as long as the Ottomans don't directly threaten Austria, the Habsburgs have bigger worries. The French. The French are quite a bit larger than they were in our timeline after the war. This means that Louis XIV, the Sun King, inherits an even more powerful state than he did in our timeline. And, perhaps even more importantly, he faces much less powerful opponents with the crippling of the Austrian realm. During this period, Louis XIV would build an even more terrifying French state, pushing France in all directions. But this French threat wouldn't go unnoticed. Pretty much nobody would be excited about the prospect of France dominating Europe. This is where the changes to our electors become very important. As the French dominate the Habsburgs, it becomes increasingly clear that they can no longer defend the empire properly, so the electors start shopping around for other emperors. I consider it a distinct possibility that the English kings are chosen for emperorship in an attempt to bind England closely to the defense of Germany. If the English kings are uninterested, the Swedes are very likely a second choice. I wouldn't even put it past them to elect the Dutch stadtholder to the position of emperor. Either way, the more France expands, the more I would predict that one of these states receives the emperorship. And so, even more so than in our timeline, the decades following the 30 Years' War are characterized by the rest of Europe attempting to contain the power of France. Who would win this conflict is tough to say and depends pretty much fully on the actions of wildcards like Poland, Sweden, Russia and the Ottomans. With that as the main line, I want to discuss a couple minor nations specifically. First, Sweden. They are possibly slightly more powerful than in our timeline, yet are still in a similar position to our own. They will spend about a century as the dominant power in the Baltics, but we have done little to make the Swedish Empire more future-proof. Fact is, Sweden simply lacked the population to be able to compete long-term with the rise of Russia, and we have done nothing to make Sweden more suited to deal with the Russian threat. Especially if the Swedes are elected Holy Roman Emperor and have to deal with the French as well, they are just insanely overstretched. The Swedish Empire still falls. Then we have Brandenburg Prussia and Bohemia, both massively important states into the future. The Prussians, under their competent Hohenzollern leadership, would attempt to become a big player in northern Germany. But what really elevated them to the status of major power was the very daring seizing of the rich region of Silesia. In our timeline, they did this during the turmoil of the Wars of the Austrian Succession. The future of Silesia would be decisive in deciding the future of northern Germany as a whole. It is very possible that under Bohemian leadership, Prussia never has a chance to seize the territory, as Bohemia's armies are much more focused on their core lands, while the Habsburg armies were spread far across their realm. Alternatively, if the Bohemian leadership is lacking, the Prussians may just seize a territory even earlier, possibly even in a joint invasion with the Habsburgs. This could create an even sooner, more powerful Prussia. Bohemia itself is very much a wildcard, as while they hold some of the richest lands in Central Europe, their ruling house, their alignment with other states, their rivals and their allies is pretty much completely unknown. It is very possible they fall to renewed Habsburg or even Polish invasion, or if they have competent and stable leadership, they can re-emerge as one of the most powerful states of Central Europe. By the end of this scenario, Europe, going into the 18th century, is significantly altered. The Ottomans are in decline, but they haven't faced major land losses to the Christians. The French threaten to reach hegemonic levels of domination over Western Europe, as both the Spanish and the Austrian Habsburgs are increasingly weak on the European stage. Personally, I would also very much love the idea of the English kings becoming the Holy Roman Emperors, as the stage is set for a century of major conflicts over the future of the continent. But that's where I'll end this video. Don't forget to check out Videntis' video on when if the Catholics won the 30 Years' War, and consider liking and subscribing to help this video grow. As always, subscribe for 2 more videos every single week, and I hope to see you next time.